Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back. Today on Milanese Math, we're going to be talking about how to add and subtract fractions. And as always, if you want to follow along with this worksheet, you can find it at the first link in the description below. So this is going to just serve as sort of a quick review and overview, reminder of how to add and subtract fractions. I'm assuming you've seen some of this stuff before, but when I refresh my students on how to do it, I always get a few definitions out of the way first. So let's say I had the fraction 1/3, okay? So the numerator is the top number of a fraction, and the denominator is the bottom number in a fraction. Okay, so if we had the fraction 1/3, the numerator would be the 1 and the denominator would be the 3. So the numerator is the top position, denominator is the bottom position. Let me write down a mixed number for you just as a refresh, so 1 1/4, and compare that to an improper fraction, 5/4. Both of those fractions have the same value, but with an improper fraction, the numerator is larger than the denominator, so 5 is bigger than 4. Another way to write that would be as a mixed number. In other words, it's 1 and 1/4. In other words, 1 whole plus another 1/4 left over. And so sometimes the directions might mention like, don't leave it as an improper fraction, change it to a mixed number. So those are just some refreshers on some terminology. The first thing I always do with my students when we're refreshing, adding and subtracting fractions is I make sure that they can reduce or simplify fractions. And in order to do that, you need to be able to think about the factors of the numbers. So a 14 and a 30, the greatest common factor that they have is going to be a 2. And so I know that a 2 will divide into 14, and I know that a 2 will also divide into a 30. And so if I divided each one of those by 2, 14 divided by 2 is 7, and 30 divided by 2 is 15, okay? So that would reduce to 7/15. Now, how did I know to pick 2? Well, 2 is the largest number that would divide into both of them. It's the biggest common factor that they have, or the greatest common factor between 14 and 30. Okay, let's do another one. 12 and 18. What's the biggest number that divides into both of them? You might think, well, a 2 would divide into both of them, and it does, but there's a bigger number, and it's a 6. So since 6 will divide evenly into both of them, divide both of those numbers by 6. 12 divided by 6 is 2. 18 divided by 6 is going to be 3, and so that fraction simplifies to 2/3. If you have one like on number 3 where it's 6 3/9, that's a mixed number. Just keep the whole number and just worry about simplifying the fraction. What would 3/9 reduce to or simplify to? Well, the biggest number that divides into a 3 and a 9 is a 3. And so if we did 3 divided by 3, we would get 1, and 9 divided by 3 is a 3. So that would reduce to 6 1/3. Okay, let's do another bigger one here, just because sometimes that greatest common factor isn't always obvious. So it's okay if you don't get it on the first try. You can always keep simplifying it if you've made a mistake or you didn't pick the biggest one. So for example, if I just glance at 140 and 180, I know that since they end in 0, both of those are going to be divisible by 10. Now, as it turns out, that's not necessarily the biggest thing that they're divisible by, but we're going to keep going anyway. So let's divide both of them by 10 just to show you what I mean. So that would be a 14 and an 18 if we divided both of those by 10. But you're not finished because 14 and 18 are both divisible by 2. So you could have picked a 20 at the beginning. That would have been the biggest number, but I'm just doing this to show you that you could still divide both of these by 2. And you're going to get a 7/9, or 7/9. So you can get the correct simplification, or reducing it, even if you don't pick the biggest number. You just have to do it a couple of more times. Okay, so that was a little bit about how to simplify the fractions. Now let's talk about how to add and subtract fractions. The big rule your teacher probably always told you is that you have to have common denominators, meaning the denominators have to be the same. And since I'm a nice guy, I started out with a bunch of them that just already had that done for you. So I want you to get the main idea. Let's look at number 5. And I think instinctively, you'll probably know the answer to this. Classic example of a pizza. Let's say the pizza is sliced into 9 different pieces, and you have 2 of those 9 pieces, and then I add 1 more to your plate, now how many of the 9 pieces do you have? Instinctively, you know that the answer is 3 ninths. You have 3 ninths of the pizza. And essentially what you did is you just keep your denominator, since they had it in common, they were both over 9, just keep that denominator and add the numerator. 2 plus 1 is 3. Now this is correct, we're just not finished because we're always supposed to simplify or reduce our final answer. And like we saw up above, 3 ninths will reduce to 1/3. Okay? Now, again, these are all nice and neat right off the bat. They all have common denominators. So let's just kind of keep practicing and make sure we get the hang of it. 7/15 subtract 2/15. Well, we keep our denominator of 15 and just do 7 subtract 2. That would be 5. Okay? So this is correct. It's just not finished, and it's because there's a number that will divide evenly into 5 and 15, and it's a 5. So if you simplify this, it will reduce to 1/3. Okay, again, such a nice guy. There's another one that already have common denominators. So you keep that denominator of 7 and add the 8 and 2. That gives me 10 sevenths. Now, you might see that that's correct, by the way, and if you're allowed to leave them as improper fractions, which for this I'm fine with if you want, but sometimes they'll tell you to change that to a mixed number. So the way, if you remember, that you would change that would be to say, how many times will 7 divide into 10? And it will divide 1 whole time, and then you would have 3 left over. So 3 sevenths left over. So 1 and 3 sevenths. Okay, one more, and then I'm gonna let you try a few. So we've got 4/13 plus 9/13. Well, they've got a common denominator, so we'll just keep it. And since this is addition, let's just add straight across the top. 4 plus 9 is 13. Now, you remember that a fraction bar means division, right? So really what this is saying, 13/13, or 13 divided by 13, which just turns out to be 1. Okay, so we would have to simplify that to 1. Okay, before we get into anything complicated, let's pause the video right here and go ahead and try numbers 9 through 12. Assuming you've had a chance to do that, now let's look at what happens in the real world when you get addition or subtraction problems that don't already have a common denominator. Well, your objective is going to be to rewrite one or both of the fractions to where they do have common denominators. Okay, here's how I kind of approach this. I'm just going to walk you through my thought process here. Number 13 says 1/8 plus 1/2. Okay, so if I've got 1/8 plus 1/2, those do not have a common denominator. 8 and 2 are not the same. So then I think about, what are the denominators? 8 and 2. What's the least common multiple of an 8 and a 2? And if you need a refresher on that, I also have a video on least common multiples and greatest common factors. But the smallest number that's a multiple of 8 and 2 is 8. So that tells me that I can keep the 1/8 the way it is. I just need to change 1/2 into an equivalent fraction that's over 8. In other words, how could I rewrite the fraction 1/2 as something over 8? Now, some people who are good with mental math or just kind of instinctively would say, oh, 4/8 is the same as 1/2. And that's true. That is the correct way to rewrite it. But for those of us who don't maybe make that connection right off the bat, how did you turn 1/2 into 1/8? Well, look at this. How did the 2 turn into an 8? What did you do to it? Well, you multiplied it by 4. So if you also multiply the top 1 times 4, you'll get 4, okay? Now it's like one of those problems from the top of the worksheet, because now they have a common denominator. If I take 1/8 plus 4/8, I'll get 5/8, okay? So the hard part is just making sure that you correctly get a common denominator. From there, it's pretty straightforward. You just keep the common denominator and then add or subtract as it tells you to do it. How about number 14? 1/2 subtract 1/3. Now, 2 and 3 are not the same, so it doesn't start with a common denominator, but I'm going to think about the least common multiple of 2 and 3, and that would be 6. So I need to change both of these fractions into something over 6. Okay, well, how did I turn this 2 into a 6? Well, I had to multiply it by 3. So let's do the same to the top. If I take 1 times 3, that would give me 3. And just double check that. Does that make sense? 1/2 and 3/6, it's the same thing. Okay, how about the 1/3? What did I do to that 3 to turn it into a 6? Well, I multiplied it by 2. So let's do the same thing on the top. If I take 1 times 2, I've got 2, so 2/6. And that was the hard part. The easy part is just doing the subtraction. Now that you have a common denominator of 6, it'll stay 3/6, subtract 2/6, leaves me with 1/6. Okay, almost there. Let's try number 15, okay? So we've got 5/6 plus 5/8. And so I wanna think about the least common multiple of 6 and 8. In other words, the smallest number that they both evenly divide into. And it's gonna be a 24. Okay? All right, so work backwards. Think, how did I turn a 6 into a 24? Well, I multiplied that by 4. So if I take the top, 5 times 4 is gonna give me 20. What about 5/8? How did I turn that 8 into a 24? Well, I multiplied it by 3. So do the same to the top. 5 times 3 is 15. Okay? All right, so if we add straight across, that'll give us 35 over 24. Now, again, it just depends. Your teacher might say it's totally okay to leave it as an improper fraction, but we can go ahead and convert it over to a mixed number. How many times would 24 divide into 35? Well, you would have 1 whole time, and then you would have 11 left over, or 11/24 left over. Okay, we're almost there. Let's do number 16 together. 3/4 subtract 9/14. So once again, look at the 4 and the 14. What's the smallest number that they would both divide into? And that would be a 28. So if you're wondering, like, if you're just, how did you come up with 28? Again, I have my multiplication tables memorized. So I kind of can look at that and say, okay, 4 and 14, they're both gonna go into 28. Then you just have to rework the fractions. So what did I do to this 4 to get it to be a 28? Well, in that case, I multiplied it by 7. So 3 times 7 is gonna give me 21. How about on the other one? 14, how did I go from a 14 to 28? I multiplied it by 2. So if I do 9 times 2, I'm gonna get 18. Okay, and then all you have to do is subtract. And so we're gonna get 21 minus 18 is 3/28. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna let you try number 17 through 20. And I hope this video was helpful on how to add and subtract fractions. If it was, consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.